Yes, that is correct. We have procedures to follow, like verify the experience. We do make phone calls to the certifiers and other contractors to verify the experience. And as Mr. Fote mentioned, there is, per law, we can only do 3%, and that's required the field investigation.
Thank you for the clarification, and that was by no means saying that the licensing division is not doing their job. It's just kind of an observation from the numbers that are being presented to me. So, thank you.
Any other board members? Not seeing any. Would the public like to comment on this item? Hearing and seeing none. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next portion of my agenda, which would be the Construction Management Education Account Awards. And if you would be so kind as to turn to page 103 and 104, at the March board meeting, staff reported that the board, the Department of Finance approved an additional $75,000 augmentation to the Construction Management Education account, which allowed staff to invite the schools to apply for their awards at a higher amount. As the chart shows on page 104, staff was able to distribute grant checks to all the schools at a higher amount in April. The next item is Testing Administration Center outsource update. The process of outsourcing CSLB administration to the vendor PSI exams will be complete as of July 1st. CSLB has moved 35 of the 47 written exams to PSI and will be moving, and we'll be moving the remainder of the exams by July 1st of 2022. Overall, the process is running smoothly. As of June 9th, 2022, PSI has administered 443 CSLB exams to applicants, and 619 more are scheduled. In addition, on the IT side of things, the programming process for systems communication between CSLB and PSI is going well. CSLB will be closing all its test centers as of July 1st, 2022. Fawad, do you have anything else to add to this item?
Yes, I'd like to take the time and recognize a couple of units within the licensing and IT division for their work for the transition to PSI. IT, of course, Jason Press and his team did a great job. And also exam development staff have worked hard these last 6 months to create over 80 new examination versions for our 47 exams to send to PSI for administration. They have also printed, laminated, bound, and shipped thousands of booklets to the 20 test centers at PSI. They have put in many hours of work on these projects in addition to their regular workload, and the transition would not have gone as smoothly without the help of everyone in the testing development division. Also, with outsourcing of exam administration less than a month away, exam administration staff continue to go above and beyond, giving excellent customer service to our candidates. The San Jose Test Center reopened at the beginning of June to give Bay Area candidates a more convenient option for their exams. For some candidates, it allowed them to take their exams sooner as exams were being pushed out further into the summer. All of this would not have been possible without exam administration staff from headquarters volunteering to work in San Jose in June to ensure the test center was open for candidates. Thank you.
For what I'd like to also really emphasize that acknowledgement of the IT staff for hitting the target of July 1st and then the outstanding work and efficient work they did in making that happen. And before I move on, are there any board members that would like to make a comment on PSI and their achievement? Hearing and seeing none. Oh, Susan?
Okay, I have. So the question again is related to PSI. So the studies we did earlier, there were motivations to move to a larger vendor so that there would be more test centers. And that was, at that time, going to be offset by our staff having to man, and the leases and systems and all of that. So when we look forward to your report in August about the transition and the customer feedback, could you also provide what the cost was? Just at a high level, did we come close to what we estimated that to be? Dave may have those answers right away, but that would be helpful as well.
Yes, Madam Chair.
And my question is not on PSI. My question is on page 103, the construction management education account. It says on that, it looks like we have two different sources, but under the fund appropriation level, it talks about the Budget Act of 2018. Was there a 2019 and a 2020 and a 2021 Budget Act, or is this a one-time?
That's a great question. What? Would you be so kind as to assist me?
That is an excellent question, Madam Chair. I will get back to you on that one.
Yeah.
It's a
The,
basic question.
no, Stacy, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, we get appropriated every year. So every year it's in the Budget Act for the CMEA since it was established. I don't have that date long ago. So we actually just increased that. It used to be 100,000 we were given to the schools. And then because we were getting so many donations, our account was filling up. So we asked to increase that authority. So they bumped it up to 175. So every year we ask for it based on how much money we have in the account. We have to ask the legislature and the Department of Finance for the authority to increase or decrease based on what is available.
Is that a line item in your budget report that you give?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yes, it is.
Okay.
And it's appropriated at 100,000 each year, but what Stacy's saying is that we have to make a request for the augmentation each year, and it'll be granted depending on whether we timely submit it or not.
And thank you, staff, for that assist today. Anyone from the public have any comments on this item? Hearing and seeing none, this concludes my portion of the licensing items on the agenda, and I give you back the board.
Thank you. Learn something new every day. So we are now on the enforcement section of our agenda. I will be turning this over to Steve Grove. After that, we will have a short public affairs update, and we'll take a short break and move on to legislation. So now, thank you, Steve. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair Granzella. I'm Steve Grove, CSLB's Chief of Enforcement. It has been a busy time in the Enforcement Division, and I'm pleased to present you with a quick update of recent activity. The Enforcement Program Update Agenda Item F1 begins on page 113 of your board packet. At the top of that page is a brief paragraph regarding staff vacancies within Enforcement Division. The Enforcement Division has 229 allocated positions out of the 430 board-wide positions. It's been almost a year and a half since we reported on division staff vacancies. For historical perspective, the number of vacant enforcement positions peaked in July 2017 at 31 positions. The division's managers and supervisors worked hard to bring that number down, and although the total number has fluctuated a bit, vacancies have been relatively stable for the last few years, with the total in the mid-20 range. As you can see on page 113, the Enforcement Division currently has 23 vacant staff positions, which is about 10% of the Enforcement Division's authorized workforce. Candidates have been selected and are pending final approval to fill 4 of those vacant positions. The other positions are in various stages of the state's hiring process. The next section of the program update includes summaries of 4 recent field investigations. As these cases illustrate, the Enforcement Division continues to prioritize the investigation of egregious misconduct in the construction industry. The first case on page 113 involves former licensees Salvador and Pamela Chiramonte, who signed contracts with about 40 victims of the 2017 Tubbs fire in the Santa Rosa area. CSLB received multiple complaints from victims alleging the Chiramontes performed substandard work or no work at all after money was paid to them. The investigation was complex and was handled by a peace officer within CSLB's Special Investigation Unit, working closely with the local district attorney's office. The investigators' hard work paid off when the district attorney charged the Chiramontes and their accomplice daughter with 59 felony counts each, including grand theft, diversion of funds, embezzlement, forgery, fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. On April 22nd of this year, Sal Chiramonte pled to 14 felony counts, one for each victim, 13 counts of 484B, diversion of construction funds, and one count of 368D, elder abuse. He will have a 6-year sentence and restitution of $1.1 million. He's entitled to a restitution hearing to determine final numbers. Amy Perry, Sal's daughter, pled to one felony 484B with a 240-day sentence and restitution. Pam Chiramonte, Sal's wife, pled to one misdemeanor 484 diversion of construction funds. The Chiramontes still face more than a dozen civil lawsuits filed by their victims. The second case I'd like to point out comes from Shasta County. It begins on page 113. In this case, unlicensed electrician Samuel Crane endangered several Shasta County residents with his shoddy work, including one victim who got a dangerous electrical shock from an improperly wired backup generator. CSLB's resident investigator in Reading handled the complaints against Crane. She referred 3 separate cases to the local district attorney for criminal prosecution. Based on her investigation, the DA charged Crane with 2 counts of grand theft. An arrest warrant was issued in May of 2021. Crane disappeared before the warrant was served, but earlier this year, he resurfaced, and new complaints against him started coming in, with 5 complaints lodged in just 2 weeks. Coordinating with CSLB, the Shasta County District Attorney's Office set up an undercover sting and lured Crane to bid on a potential job. Crane was arrested as soon as he showed up at the sting. He was booked into jail on the outstanding warrant. He's now awaiting trial on felony charges in Shasta County. A current statistical overview of the Enforcement Division begins at the bottom of page 114. Please note that all of the division statistics in the board packet are for the first 9 months of this fiscal year. That is from July 1st, 2021 through April 31st of 2022. During this 9-month period, you will see that the division initiated 15,385 complaint investigations. That's over 1,700 complaints per month and a 20% increase over the same period the previous fiscal year. The next few entries in the program update reveal the number of incoming complaints is continuing to overtake production output. The number of pending investigations is currently 4,777, which is a 9% increase over the figure we reported at the March board meeting. The average number of cases closed per investigator per month continues to be 8, which is lower than our closure goal of 10. And the number of age cases, which is those over 270 days old, is currently 206, a 10% increase over the figure we reported in March. I'm working with the enforcement management team and division supervisors to address these numbers. We're exploring several options for maximizing productivity. Among the options under consideration is modifying telework agreements to provide enhanced supervisory assistance for staff who have shown a substantial decrease in productivity and/or efficiency while teleworking. To address the increase in consumer file complaints, the Enforcement Committee may be asked to consider complaint handling process changes to prioritize the more serious investigations and consider hiring a consultant to review enforcement resources and allocation. The hiring of a consultant is in line with CSLB's strategic plan, item 2.1, that requires evaluating enforcement resources and preparing a scope of work to hire a consultant to present to the Enforcement Committee in July of 2022. The next sections of the program update, which begin on page 115, highlight some of the division's achievements for the 9-month period ending on April 31st. The combined negotiation efforts of the intake and mediation centers and the investigation centers resulted in over $17 million in restitution to financially injured parties. 432 complaint investigations were referred for criminal prosecution by the investigative centers. 1,195 citations were issued, 46% of which were issued to licensees. 257 accusations were filed. 283 licenses were revoked, and 130 licenses were placed on probation. The investigators in CSLB's statewide investigative fraud team, or SWIFT, have also been very busy with their proactive enforcement efforts. For the first 9 months in this fiscal year, SWIFT investigators conducted 11 undercover sting operations, participated in 242 days of enforcement sweeps, and responded to 823 leads. As a result of these activities, SWIFT closed 2,995 cases, 915 of which resulted in administrative or criminal legal actions. SWIFT investigations during this period led to 309 referrals to local district attorneys for criminal prosecution, with 243 of these referrals for contracting without a license. 501 citations were issued, 103 letters of admonishments were issued, 1,133 advisory notices were issued for minor violations, and 243 stop orders were issued for failure to obtain required workers' compensation insurance. Here's a brief update regarding SWIFT undercover operations over the last 6 months. Prior to the COVID pandemic, SWIFT was averaging around 80 sting operations per year. Even then, the major hurdle staff had to contend with when tasked with setting up a sting operation was obtaining a property, whether commercial buildings or private residence. We cannot conduct stings if we don't have a property to use. When the COVID outbreak shut down businesses and schools across the country in March of 2020, SWIFT sting operations came to a temporary halt. Eventually, we resumed scaled-down operations, but it is now even more difficult to find properties with the continued concern over COVID. In 2020, we were only able to conduct 16 stings. In 2021, we conducted 18. So far this calendar year, we have conducted 12 operations, including one in progress this very minute. While the overall number of stings being conducted remains low compared to pre-COVID rates, SWIFT continues to concentrate on making the biggest impact possible with our limited resources, 27 investigators statewide. To illustrate this, SWIFT has conducted stings from one end of the state to the other just since January of this year. In the northern part of the state, Shasta County, and in the city of Paradise, devastated by the Camp Fire in 2018, in Sonoma and Monterey counties along the coast, in Fresno in the Central Valley, and in the Southern California city of Vista down in San Diego County. At this time, I would like to give you some highlights from some of these recent stings. On January 19th, a sting was conducted in the town of Paradise. 4 suspects were arrested for unlicensed contracting and faced felony charges because the unlicensed activity took place in a declared disaster area. One unlicensed contractor bid $17,000 for fencing on the sting property, which is well over the legal limit for contracting without a license. Another unlicensed contractor was also charged with possession of methamphetamine and fentanyl. All suspects were ordered to appear in Butte County Superior Court. On February 23rd and 24th, a sting operation in Fresno resulted in 16 unlicensed contractors issued notices to appear in criminal court for contracting without a license. One suspect provided a bid of $16,000 for synthetic turf grass. During the sting, one of the contractors cited for unlicensed contracting was found to have a no bail warrant for failure to appear in court. He was taken into custody by California Department of Insurance detectives who were assisting us with the operation. On April 13th and 14th, a sting was conducted in San Diego County. A total of 15 people were cited during the operation in the city of Vista after offering bids for concrete work, tree trimming, interior and exterior painting, and window installations. 13 were cited for misdemeanor charge of contracting without a license. 2 others were cited for working as unregistered home improvement salespersons. Most recently, just last week, a sting was conducted in South Lake Tahoe, resulting in 7 suspects receiving notices to appear in Superior Court. One suspect was issued an administrative citation. The highest bid received was $15,000 for a deck replacement. 7 of the suspects were specifically targeted from their illegal advertisements placed on Craigslist. One of the suspects was arrested and transported by the El Dorado County Sheriff's Department on a $5,000 arrest warrant stemming from a stolen snowmobile. The final appointment ended up giving a bid of $3,500 for tree removal, but that was the least of his problems. While running him for wants and warrants, it was discovered that he was wanted on a $25,000 arrest warrant for check fraud. Ultimately, he was also transported and booked into jail. The highly dedicated staff in the SWIFT unit are all eager to return to regular sting operations, but they can't do it without the help from the public, contractors, and industry partners. Finding available properties to use for the operations is the assistance that we need. Please reach out to me or anyone in SWIFT if you or someone you know can assist with providing a property. Agenda item F2 is an update on CSLB's Solar Energy System Restitution Program, or SESRP. And that update begins on page 121 of your board packet. As you know, the Solar Energy System Restitution Program was created by the legislature in 2021. The program provides $5 million to CSLB for the purpose of providing restitution to qualifying homeowners who were financially harmed by a solar contractor through fraud, misrepresentation, or another unlawful act. This is CSLB's first ever restitution program, and division staff did a lot of work to get it up and running. The program became fully operational last October. At the bottom of page 121, you will see some statistics for the solar restitution program, and I have some updated numbers to report. As of June 3rd, 2022, here's where we are with the solar energy restitution program. 210 claims have been received by CSLB. Of these, 64 claims have been approved and sent to DCA for the issuance of checks. The total amount of restitution approved by CSLB is almost $760,000. An additional 17 claims have been closed for various reasons, such as lack of jurisdiction or claim duplication. 2 claims were referred to arbitration, and 127 complaints were pending. Most of the pending complaints are waiting for additional supporting evidence, such as a CSLB paid industry expert inspection to help establish the financial injury. CSLB is continuing with efforts to get the word out about this program. On May 12th, CSLB's Public Affairs Office distributed a new press release describing the program, which was picked up by several Spanish-speaking media outlets. Additionally, in April of this year, CSLB sent letters to prior complainants who were potential program claimants. We received 21 new claims in response to these letters. We're also continuing to collaborate with other stakeholders to maximize the visibility of this unique program. This is informational item only. There's no action required of the board. Are there any comments from the board?
Through the chair, I do have a couple of comments and questions. Steve, I appreciate the work that enforcement does. It really does help tackle that underground economy, especially in California. A couple of questions. One question, you referred to seeking properties from the public. That's probably throughout the state. Is that including residential and commercial properties?
That's correct, residential or commercial.
Is there any per diem or anything that's provided to those property owners?
Yes, we do have some limited funding to provide a modest fee.
So the public who are watching, you could, instead of Airbnb or another thing like that, you could use CSLB as a way to make some funds. So, thank you.
Mariah, is there any public comment?
Are there any public comments?
There's none at this time.
In closing, I want to thank the enforcement staff for their hard work and continued dedication to consumer protection. I'm looking forward to the proposed July Enforcement Committee meeting where enforcement strategic plan items will be reported on and discussed. And that includes the Enforcement Committee update.
Thank you, Steve, for stepping in. Just to wrap this up, are there any further board comments or public comments? Seeing none, we will move on to Mr. Michael Mark with Public Affairs.
All right, thank you, Chair Granzilla. As Chair of the Public Affairs Committee, I'm pleased to bring you the Public Affairs update today, starting on page 124 and 125 of the board packet. The first part of the update describes the efforts of staff in coordinating CSLB communications with local communities during the 2021 wildfires. And we provided you an update about some of those efforts at our March board meeting. Moving on to page 130, Public Affairs highlights the additional 5 Get Licensed to Build webcasts, which has been hosted since our last board update. 2 of these which were in Spanish. The workshops include Spanish-speaking staff who answer questions in real time. Videos of these workshops are then posted on the CSLB website for further viewing. These fantastic productions give prospective contractors a place to ask questions and learn the process of licensure. Moving on to the page at the bottom of page 130, Public Affairs notes the posting of an additional 4 videos online in Spanish since our last update. Providing multimedia content in English and Spanish is part of the larger Public Affairs strategic plan goal of improving user experience and accessibility. Moving on to page 131, the number of social media followers of CSLB accounts have increased on nearly every social media service since the new year started. A testimony to Public Affairs staff's hard work in getting the word out there about CSLB consumer protection mission. Pages 132 through 135 of the board packet explain more about that growth and outline social media highlights in general, which include posts about important licensing and enforcement topics, as well as special issues of board's priority, such as promoting women in construction. Other posts highlight the statewide investigative fraud team, better known as SWIFT, and when needed, disaster-related posts. Sting-related posts are typically the most popular on social media and get the most interaction from the public. As always, we invite you to follow CSLB on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and also Flickr. And you can find these links on the CSLB webpage. For stakeholder communications, public affairs staff have issued several industrial bulletins since our last update on March. We have issued industrial bulletins on regulatory issues affecting contractors who use forklifts, information about CSLB expanding its licensee examination services, and information about new treated wood requirements for contractors in California. Moving on to page 136. Toward the bottom is information about CSLB's ongoing media relations work. Public Affairs regularly fields inquiries from the media on multiple CSLB-related topics and distributes these news releases when appropriate, such as announcing when the next Get Licensed to Build workshop and press releases about unlicensed contractor stings. Moving to page 137, details the ongoing work of California legislators on our consumer and senior scam stoppers workshops. We have had an additional 9 senior scam stopper events to report to you since our March update, which are the between February and April, and the chart on page 138. They've all been virtual senior scam events. Page 139 details the publication and the design services of the public affairs staff. They're constantly working on new publications and updating outdated information in older publications. In addition to all the work of public affairs staff, they also regularly update the employee intranet site with stories, photos, and information updates. Continues to further CSLB's communications objectives. Since this is an information item, no action is required for the board. I do have a couple other comments. The Public Affairs Department, they make and do everything they can to help inform the public, including the webpage, which is, I would say, one of the greatest tools of the department. And I know it's a correlation with IT, but there's so much news that Public Affairs does give to the public. And as a whole, we are a consumer-related agency. So is there any comment from board members?
My question is, for our recorded webcast services, do we have anything for the hearing impaired?
What
Signing.
page are you referring to?
Just in general, do we have signing for the hearing impaired on any of our webcast services?
I'm going to defer to Michael.
I don't think we have signers, but we have closed captions on productions, but I would need to check to confirm which productions those are and report back to you, which I will do.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board comment? Any comments from the public? Okay, Chair, that concludes our report.
Thank you. Let's take a 5 to 10 minute break, and we will come back for legislation. All right. The last item on today's agenda, the last items on today's agenda are specific to legislation. I now turn it over to Legislation Committee Chair Jim Ruane.
Thank you, Chair Grangello. We'll begin with the legislative agenda with item A. Item A is an update on previously considered 2021-2022 pending legislation. Beginning on page 145 of your packet, this section of the agenda is an update for the board bills that CSLB has already acted on or discussed. For this reason, I am asking Chief of Legislation Mike Jamnetsky to go in order for each of the bills in this portion of the agenda and provide a brief update on these bills the board has already considered. Mike, is there anything the board needs to know?
Yes, I will move relatively quickly through Agenda H1A, and then we will ask for board comment and public comment after that. So to move through these bills, just an update, AB 646. The board has been in support of this bill for over a year now, and it is moving forward. It relates to removing expunged convictions that were a cause of discipline. If an expungement order is received, the board would remove them from the website. The board is being heard in committee next week, or the bill, rather. AB 1733, this would have provided for remote meetings. This bill did not move out of committee. The board did take a support vote, but the latest update is it is still in committee and did not pass the policy deadline. AB 1747, this is a board-sponsored bill for permit requirements that increase compliance for contractors with Title 24 HVAC installation standards, as well as increasing the civil penalties for a number of health and safety violations. Again, it's a board-sponsored bill, and it's moving along. It's on its way to appropriations. AB 1874, the board may recall in March, they took an opposed position on that bill. It was sort of a symbolic opposition because the bill had failed passage, and that bill has also not moved forward. That bill would have related to the $500 threshold for licensure for advertising and contracting and increasing that threshold. AB 2105, this is the bill that provides for a half off initial and original license fees for military veterans, and the board is in support of the bill. And we did want to update the board to some technical amendments. There was a phrase in the bill that required some clarification regarding the active duty and honorable status, and we just provided some technical amendments to make sure staff is aware of how to have the veterans provide that information, and that is via the DD 214, which is a process we already provide. So that technical language, thanks to the author's office, was put in the bill. It's otherwise the same bill. So it'll make it a little bit easier for staff to process. And thank you very much to the chair, Jim, for working with us on the technical amends. AB 2374, the board took a support position on this bill in March. This relates to illegal dumping. This bill is also continuing to move forward. AB 1237, the board took a support motion on this bill. This bill also relates to military veterans, and it relates to being called to active duty, and it's already an existing law, but the bill itself just clarifies that definition. And again, and this wasn't something CSLB worked on, but we are in support of it. It was amended to clarify what that term active duty means, and that will also help staff at CSLB as well as other DCA agencies. SB 216, this is the board's sponsored workers' comp bill for workers' comp required for the 4 classifications in the first year, which is the C8 concrete contractor, the C20 HVAC contractor, the D49 tree service contractor, and the C22 asbestos abatement contractor. We did discuss some amendments to that bill at the March meeting, and I had mentioned at the time that they weren't in print. Those amendments are now in print. So the way the bill is operating now is in the first year, those licensees would be required to have workers' comp, and then the remainder of contractors by 2026. And that bill is also moving forward. AB 2890. Oh, that's the end of the previously considered pending legislation. So I went quickly through those. So back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mike. This is a status update only. No further action is required from the board at this time. But before we move on, do board members have any comments on any of these items that Mike was speaking about? Is there anything from the public? All right, moving on. The next item is on page 160, begins the bills for the second portion of the legislative agenda today. We are now on page 160, beginning with AB 2894. This bill requires a licensed contractor, if they have workers' compensation insurance, to inform CSLB of their workers' compensation classification code and requires CSLB to post that information on its website. Mike, a little update, please.
Yes, so we discussed this bill at the March meeting, and as you may recall, the board did not take a position. We have worked with Legislative Chair Jim Ruane to work with the author's office on technical amendments. So what's happening with this bill, as mentioned, it does require the workers' comp class codes to be provided to CSLB, and as the bill was written, it didn't provide a methodology for that to occur. It just was kind of a statement in the law. And so we looked at it, and our IT staff looked at it, and it appeared it would require a new form, a separate form than the forms that licensees already submit. And it was kind of unclear the scope of the classifications that the board would input to put on the website. So maybe one contractor has one or two workers' comp class codes, but then other contractors might have many. And so we looked at all of this, and we came up with a fiscal amount for what it would, possibly require the board to process these documents. And we talked to the sponsors, and we talked to the author's office, and they were extremely gracious. And they worked with us on some language that would put that requirement in the renewal form, the license renewal form. So as opposed to a standalone form for this particular information, it could be inputted in a form that CSLB already uses, and is submitted by licensees every 2 years for active licensees, and we can tailor that form to include this information. So we were able to get our fiscal down to around $227,000 at the outset to IT staff time to integrate this information into our renewal. The author's office has been extremely helpful, as well as the sponsors, and they have accepted CSLB's technical amendments to figure out a way for us to reasonably process this information. Also, we did suggest a cap of the number of class codes, because again, it's unclear at this time how many class codes a licensee would need to put on the renewal. And we also have to work with WCIRB to populate those class codes into the renewal. So there's some work there. And so again, we've submitted the amendments. I don't think that they're in print at this time, but we're hopeful that they are, or they will be. And that's the update on 2894. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. The staff has not made a recommendation on this bill, which amounts to a watch or neutral or no position. As a result, this is an update only, and no action is required by the board unless a board member makes a motion. Is there any board comment? Any comment from the public? Okay, we'll move on to page 161, AB 2916. This bill provides CSLB direction to publicly disclose a letter of admonishment on a contractor's license for either 1 year or 2 years, depending upon the severity of the alleged violation. As it states in your packet, this bill was amended to its present form a few days before our last board meeting and could not be considered by the board. The packet also notes technical amendments to the bill, which staff worked with the board chair and I to propose to the author. Mike, please update the board about what has happened with this bill.
Yes, so this was another one kind of behind the scenes, and we've mentioned at a lot of different board meetings the way these bills move, fast sometimes before the board gets an opportunity to convene and all discuss them. And so we really, really appreciate the board procedure manual process for working with the Ledge Chair and the board chair on bills that affect CSLB before the board can discuss and meet and discuss them. And so this was one of those. This bill was amended to its form that affected CSLB a few days before our last board meeting. And so what it did was, you're all familiar with our letter of admonishment program. It's a kind of a formalized warning letter for discipline. So if a contractor is presumed to violate the law, CSLB can elect to issue a letter of admonishment instead of a citation. The law requires that letter of admonishment be posted on the website for 1 year as a not a formal discipline, but as a notification to consumers that the law was potentially violated. Well, this bill, when it was introduced, changed that disclosure period to 2 years. And so we kind of talked about that behind the scenes. We talked about that with Board Chair Ruane and Chair Granzella, and we kind of mentioned how the letter of admonishment program was intended as a formalized warning. And it's not issued for contractors that are alleged to have created egregious violations of the law or for which there's financial injury. Citations are used for those kind of violations. So the purpose of the letter of admonishment was sort of subtle violations. So we worked with the author's office to provide CSLB the authority to determine in which case it could be 2 years as opposed to mandated 2 years. So that's what we did behind the scenes. And as a result, the author's office, because they were so helpful with the amendments, we did request from the chair and the alleged chair authority to do a support if amended. And so they did do the amends. And then because they amended it, we also worked with our two chairs here to issue a support. So that's where we're at on that bill now, and it is moving forward.
Thank you, Mike. Once again, this is an update only. No action is required of the board. Any board comment?
I have a board comment. So with amendments, it's a support, so you're still not seeking a recommendation from the full board on this bill?
We were
Or
able.
was this printed before or after, or amendments?
Yeah, there's no vote on this one because everything I just went through happened between kind of mid-March and mid-April. And so there's a procedure in our board procedure manual. If a measure is introduced that affects the contractor state license law prior to the board being able to convene, that the board chair and the legislative chair jointly have authority to authorize staff to issue a support position. And we were able to, the author's office was willing to provide that discretion for the 1 or 2 years. And because they were willing to do that, we did a support if amended, they amended it, and then we did a support. So yeah, there's no request from the board at this time.
Thank you. Any other board comments? Any comments from the public? Our next item is on page 163, SB 1076. This bill requires the State Department of Public Health and the CSLB implement an education program that would inform Californians affected by lead renovation, repair, and painting requirements. As it states in your packet, staff was able to work with Board Chair and I to provide possible technical amendments to this bill. Mike, please explain everything that is happening with this bill.
Yes, and so I also, I'll mention that, I've been in this job for a few years, and I don't recall this many bills requiring this kind of handling. It's sort of unique. It's not an indication of anything specific, but this was another one. It was amended in March to deal generally with the Department of Public Health and its requirements to implement a federal lead renovation and repair program. Well, it was amended to provide that CSLB jointly work with the Department of Public Health to develop an education campaign and implement an informational campaign to inform members of the public who are required by federal law and also California Department of Public Health rules to obtain certification for lead repair and painting. The staff, again, we contacted Chair Granzella and Legislative Chair Jim Ruane and mentioned that the bill is written, there's 5 categories of just like people who need to have this certification through the Department of Public Health. And only one of those categories directly relates to CSLB contractors and or their employees. The others are inspectors, evaluators, lead abatement people, potentially property owners and their employees. And so we just kind of, the board's not, obviously there's no position that's been taken, but we obtained approval for a letter from the chair and the alleged chair to ask the committee and the author's office when it was going through committee for clarification on what CSLB's role would be in this education campaign, because that's a lift, to develop a campaign and potentially inform people of these requirements that are not necessarily related to our constituents or stakeholders, if you will. So how do we educate people that we don't license or, that sort of thing. So we had some conversations, and the author's office is amenable to amending the bill to provide that CSLB provide information after it's been developed by the Department of Public Health. And we did talk with the Department of Public Health, and we did talk to the author's office, and there may be an amendment that does that, which is if CSLB is involved in an education campaign, it'll be distribution of materials that are developed by the Department of Public Health, not a campaign that's CSLB staff puts together. So that's where we're at. It has not been amended, but that's the latest.
Thank you, Mike. Once again, this is an update only, and no action is required of the board. Any board comment? Anything from the public? All right, our next item is on page 165, SB 1164. This bill requires the California Energy Commission, CEC, draft a report to the legislature that would propose development of a statewide HVAC database that stores compliance, installation, and acceptance test documentation for HVAC systems. The bill requires CEC consult with CSLB in drafting a report. Mike, is there anything you want to add about this bill?
So, again, this is somewhat unique. This was it was amended 2 days ago. And so I looked at the amendments, and the content of the bill, what it's requiring, is still going to be the same, but instead of the report that's described in here, so as written, this analysis, as written, it provides that the CEC consult with CSLB to draft a report to recommend to the legislature that this program be developed, which would house permit compliance information for HVAC and permit construction information for HVAC. That program is still being required, but instead of a legislative report, it's the bill is asking the CEC to simply go through the rulemaking process to create the same program. So rather than research it, they're going to draft. The bill would provide that the CEC draft regulations, but what's being requested is the same. There's an HVAC registry and compliance system that would go online, and it would track the purchases of HVAC systems and who purchases them and the license number of the contractor, and ideally track what would be installed with or without permit, or without permits. And then the second item is a document and data registry to track installation. So one tracking is purchase, the other tracking is installation. The idea is that we try to ensure compliance with the permit requirements of HVAC installations. So I apologize, that was somewhat muddled. The analysis is still the same as to what's being in the packet as to what's being created, but instead of a report to the legislature, the CEC is going to go through the rulemaking process to create this, and CSLB is no longer being consulted, but we are mentioned as an agency, one of many, who could benefit from this system that's going to be created. So that's the rundown. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Mike. The staff recommendation is that the board support this bill. This would include the authority for staff to communicate this position in written letters and public testimony. At this time, is there a motion and a second?
Michael Mark motion.
A second.
And I'll clarify, the motion is to go with staff recommendation.
And I'll second that.
Okay, Mariah, you got the motion maker and the seconder? All right, thank you. Is there any board comment?